Okay, it's just a few minutes past the hour, but I think we'll start, and that way we can have people filter in as we go. But we are at the top of the hour, so I do want to get started. So, um, hi everybody. My name is Jeff Geipel. I run the Mining Shared Value Program of Engineers the Borders Canada. I'm with Tatiana Alarcon on my team. And today we are relaunching the Energy Local Content Map, which we're really excited to do with the support of Ipieca. I'll go into who we are as an organization a bit more in a minute, and also the purpose of the map. But first, I want to hand over to Chloe at Ipieca to lay out a bit more about themselves and their involvement in this project.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Chloe Pronelou, and I'm the manager in the Sustainability and Social Performance team at Ipieca. At Ipieca, we're really excited to sponsor the new local content map. The map has been a great resource, and we've heard it from members and others to access information on local content legislation from over 30 countries in the world. So I'm sure some of you will have clicked on it at least once or twice in the past, if not more. And now this resource is available again, and we're grateful that Jeff, Tatiana, and the team are continuously working to ensure that the website is kept up to date. And next slide, please. Thank you. Ipieca has been doing work on this topic for some time, and our members see local content as a great way to create shared value, that is to generate and grow economic opportunities in local communities and host countries, while contributing to the competitiveness of projects and operations. But when developing local content strategies, it is essential to understand host government requirements, since these strategies not only need to deliver on creating shared value, but of course comply with the law. And so Ipieca is sponsoring the map because it really helps all practitioners access and understand host government policies on local content both effectively and reliably. Doing so, we enable our members to contribute to the social and economic development of host countries and communities, which is one of our organization's guiding principles. We also believe that the local content will continue to play an important role through the energy transition, of course, as renewable energy development can and should have a positive impact on local economic development. And that's why we're so happy that Jeff and his team are planning to expand the coverage to include legislation related to local content in renewables. Before I leave you and we get on with the rest of the content of the webinar, I just wanted to put on the screen some of the Ipieca good practice guidance and documents that on local content and social investment that we've developed over the years. They contain valuable guidance and insights, and they're available for download on our website. So please go ahead and check them out. Right. Well, I think that's it for me. But thank you for joining the webinar to learn more about the Energy Local Content Map, and to hear from our speaker, from Valerie. We're really excited to have her. So we hope that the map becomes a valuable and trusted tool for you. Back to you, Jeff.
Great, thanks so much. And as Chloe alluded to, we've got Valerie from the New Producers Group today here, so we're really excited to have her speak. This is one of two webinars. We had a second webinar, or the first webinar, I should say, yesterday, and this one is a bit more targeted the Eastern Hemisphere, so people in Australia, I hope, have joined. It's a bit of a smaller group, so by all means, please do take advantage of Valerie's time and ours in terms of asking questions. We can have a bit of a discussion. But we're going to go over the features of the map, and then Valerie's going to talk a bit about her work as well as some of the challenges of making local content policy. So without further ado, here is the Energy Local Content Map. So just as a start, the program that is operating the map, of course, is us, the MSV program of Engineers Without Borders, and our entire mission is to I guess, push and help the extractive industries increase local procurement and wider economic benefits from extractive industry activities. So we work with mining companies, oil and gas companies, governments, essentially anyone who's out there to try to make sure that more of the benefits of extraction stay in host communities and host countries. To that end, we do focus quite a lot on empowering different actors in the global extractive industry system, in terms of providing them information to have best practices and case studies and other things to approach these topics, and programming in the best way possible. So to that end, the origin of this current energy local content map is that we started with the World Bank, something that was originally called the Local Content Community Practice, and then it was changed to the Extractives-led Local Economic Diversification Community Practice, or the ELLED program. And the ELLED program was a online platform where we connected practitioners in local content from oil and gas, mining companies, governments, consultants, and sort of anyone who was working in the space of local content um, on an online platform and a resource library. And then eventually that was supported by a ELLED framework, which is an online policy kind of repository and guidance piece for governments, as well as the ELLED map. And the ELLED map is, or was and now is, the energy local content map, is meant to be a map that provides a lay of the land in local content regulations for the given countries on the map, so that any practitioner can get a really quick, exact picture of what's going on in local content. And this is something that we've encountered a lot of demand for from policymakers, from consultants, from companies themselves. And I'll go a bit more into that in a minute. But in terms of the map, its focus and its contents, the goal is to have the legal and policy material for each given country in the same space, relevant country stats, just to give you as practitioner the context of local content laws and initiatives, analysis and case studies. So certainly a lot of in more in-depth papers, as well as sort of law firm analysis, which is quite common for local content laws, and news articles. So you will be able to do the map and see sort of a snapshot of what's going on currently on local content. And lastly, in-country initiatives. The current map covers 29 countries, and we're going to be adding 3 more this year, and then more in 2025, pending membership of Ipieca's interests and other stakeholders. And with this map was funded by the World Bank until early last year in 2023, but the World Bank, for a number of reasons, has sort of withdrawn from knowledge products and a little bit frankly, from the oil and gas sector as well. So that to us is a real shame, because we need to be empowering the current oil and gas producers as well as the emerging ones to make the best policy, and for that matter, to empower companies and other actors to do this issue well, even in amidst the climate transition and green transition that oil and gas is definitely part of. Again, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with this map, what we have found, and so where the idea came from and where the demand came from stakeholders, was that we've consistently seen that industry, government, consultants, everybody's recreating the wheel and remapping the same exact regulations and news. So whether you're a Ipieca member who is tasked with researching the local content picture of a host country you're either entering or operating in, a consultant doing work in this space, or a government who is considering changes for their current local content policy, we see the same exact sort of mapping and researching of regulations and news over and over and over. And so the idea with the map here is, can we centralize all this content into one space? And so that instead of everyone doing a small bit of research here and there on their own time, we can do the bulk of the research for you and put everything in the same place. And so whether you're a mining company or an oil and gas company, you come to the map and it's all there, instead of having to spend hours and hours on Google and struggling with that. So the link to this, the idea is that we can't really make proper government policy, or for that matter, company local content processes and policies without having full information. And so we consistently see, for example, the oil and gas local content regulations being made by either the government or a consultant working with the government, and they really, frankly, don't have a full picture of what is being done in other countries, what has worked, what has not worked. And so we're trying to sort of fix that. And then likewise, there's also a number of supplier development initiatives, other types of aid programming, NGO programming, industry programming, that are essentially made without understanding what is out there. And so, for example, we have in the map a list of relevant initiatives for a given country, and we've seen in our work that supplier development programs are often funded and started by multilaterals and bilaterals, and yet they haven't even really mapped out the existing supplier development initiatives in that countries, for example. So what we want to do is put them all in one place so that if you are, for example, a USAID or some other organization considering a supplier development program, you enter and know it's already out there, and adjust your plan accordingly. With a new URL, it's called energylocalcontentmap.org, so people can kind of quickly take a quick look while they're on the webinar here. It is the same information that, in fact, that users of the previous map have relied on. We are updating the current countries right now. The World Bank had been much more mining focused, so the country selection was admittedly biased towards the mining sector. And some countries that were on there that didn't have a lot of oil and gas activity were not on the map itself. And so, for example, Guyana is a country that we are adding this year because of its heavy oil and gas production. That wasn't on the map. And so we're adding countries now that have oil and gas activity and maybe don't have very much in the way of mining. We are also really thrilled to be adding renewables to the renewable energy to this map. So now we will be looking at local content regulations for solar, wind power, and various other forms of renewables. And of course, Ipieca members and other stakeholders who work in the oil and gas sector are also increasingly looking at renewable power as part of the energy mix in their own operations, as well as, and for that matter, governments are doing the same thing. And so we'll be really thrilled to add that to all the existing map countries and then with the new map countries as well. Again, we'll be adding more countries, and we have a suggested resource link, so I'll cover that in a minute. But essentially what we're trying to do here is crowd in, Ipieca members, members of the community, stakeholders in local content to contribute resources. And I think what we want to do is become sort of the, I guess, a central meeting point for documents on this issue. So, if you are a consultant and you write a paper on local content in a given country, we'd love to hear from you so we can put that on the map, and then people will see that. Again, you can take a look in your own browser at what the map looks like, but here is sort of a couple screenshots of what the countries' profiles look like. So they start off with, the key stats for a given country. They cover the local content laws. And so I think many of you will have struggled to find local content laws for a given country. The websites of many countries are not very up to date. There's definitely a problem with old documents that have been superseded by new ones being out there. And so what we've done is we put together all the content laws for these countries in one place in the first section of the map. So we're quite excited about that. We won't be translating materials. We will put any official English translations up for that, of course. But for example, in Senegal, which has got some new legislation, we won't be translating it, but we will, for example, put in analysis that may be done in English of the Senegalese local content law in the analysis section of the map. So we hope that will support some of the language barriers for some of this legislation. I think what we hope will be a really key feature, and has been, based on feedback, one of the most popular features of the map is a monthly newsletter. So back with the local content and ELLED community practice with the World Bank, what we had done is essentially our team has mapped out, I guess, the entire world of local content in the form of social media, Google alerts, and we've sort of been able to look at news going on around the world. And what we've done is compile that for you. So each month we will be adding new news stories to the map itself, but we are also going to make a monthly snapshot of everything we have added in the previous month, so that essentially you will get a picture of local content this month, for example. In the first one will be coming out soon, which will review June and before. Everything going on this month in local content around the world, you'll be able to see in one newsletter. So it's meant to be very sort of dynamic and one-stop shop for exactly everything going on in there. So to subscribe to the newsletter, you can go to the URL itself, or Tatiana, if you don't mind, if you haven't already, putting in the chat the link to the registration for the newsletter. So again, we're really excited about that. And to reiterate, anyone who is a member, or I guess it's not a member, but if you are a subscriber to the newsletter, you can simply let us know that you have a new paper coming out or new something. And if you put it up, we will be very glad to feature it in the newsletter each month. So it's kind of a free space for people to put content. And like I say, here's the submit a resource function of the website. So you'll be able to put in your contact information as well as the resource. Again, those are the types of content. Now, I will say that we are trying not to be sort of I guess an ideological gatekeeper on this. The map is meant to be everything that's out there on these topics. So essentially, if there's content out there that is critical of local content legislation, we'll put that up. If there's content that is is arguing the case for a particular type of legislation or that one country's approach is working, we'll also be putting that up. So we don't want to be a gatekeeper of that. The idea is for users to be able to see the good, the bad, the pro, the con for various types of legislation. And Valerie is going to speak a bit about some of those challenges of picking the right local content policy approach. But we don't want to sort of hide the ball with any kind of information. We will, however, not promote promotional materials. So, for example, if there's a news story which is basically a thinly veiled promotion for an upcoming conference, for example, or some kind of consulting firm which is advertising its services and local content consulting, we're definitely thrilled to have you part of the community, but we don't want to have that kind of content necessarily on the map. So the map is meant to be a very neutral purveyor of these things. And that's the map. So before we hand over to Valerie, we can open it up to Q&A on the map itself and any discussions. You can use this is a webinar in Zoom, so you can use the Q&A function on your screen to ask any questions. And you also get to raise your hand, I believe, and we can pick you if you want to speak verbally. But for probably Q&A and typing questions is the most appropriate way.
Thanks very much, Jeff. First, just to say, really thank you for inviting me on this webinar to Mining Share Valued and Ipieca. It's great to be able to share kind of the new producer's perspective. So just to give you all a little bit of a profile on the group I'm speaking about is the New Producers for Sustainable Energy. We used to be called the New Producers Group, and it's 22 countries that are some at the exploration stage, some at the development stage, so have made significant oil and gas discoveries, and others are at the production stage, so early production. And so I'll be have in mind sort of the experience of countries like Uganda, Namibia, Suriname that are developing their discoveries, and Guyana and Ghana, for example, that are at the production stage. And I think, of course, local content is a big question already for countries at the exploration stage, but I think it's not really at that point that the focus really hones in on local content. But as soon as there's a discovery, of course, local content is the key focus across the group. It's the number one issue that they focus on post-discovery. And, I think there's a real interest across the group to in local content and in other issues to really sort of be avoiding the mistakes of historical producers, to be doing better, to be getting more value out of the sector. And local content really is one of those areas as well. And so it's quite an interesting topic because local content really, I think, across the group is really a public focus. Like the public in the countries is most interested in local content policy, and the news, the debates nationally are really around that. And as a result, it's really a political focus as well. And the New Producers for Sustainable Energy works mostly with technocrats, so with the bureaucrats who draft the policies. And we organize peer-to-peer exchanges between them so they can learn about what each other is doing in managing or navigating the sector, overseeing it with policies and regulations. And so very frequently we have officials that are asking for templates. They're asking what others have done. And so I think, you know, the energy local content map is a great resource for the group, because it really answers that question of providing right there all of the resources per country. So I think that's going to be extremely useful for our countries. So I think as I said, you know, local content is really the key focus across the group. And I think if you look at Namibia, Suriname, Guyana, Mozambique, Uganda, Ghana, they all have developed oil and gas local content policies. And some of them are at different stages of development, so they're in consultation, but they have several years ahead of them. So, you know, first oil, I think in Namibia isn't expected probably till 2029, gas in 2027, but local content is the priority there. So, but I think, you know, maybe some of the analysis of local content across these countries shows that implementation hasn't always been very successful. So there, you know, you may emulate the local content policies of your neighbors and adopt very good laws and policies, but implementation is often a challenge, and then the results are disappointing. And there's been a lot of analysis over the years, especially very good academic work on looking at, you know, why implementation isn't so successful. Often it points to the capacity of regulators, under-resourced, or not having the sort of the power to really enforce regulations. We might look at often the capacity of suppliers, saying that, you know, capacity is not there. But really, I think it's about the industrial baseline surveys. Has the country done a survey of supplier capacity, of what the supply offer is? And then, of course, being very realistic about the demand. That's something that's quite important for an emerging producer as well, because a lot of the countries in our group are not Nigeria's. They don't have a huge sector. They may have 3 projects or 3 fields. You know, it's a relatively small scale oil and gas sector in most. And then having that industrial baseline survey to understand what the country can provide the sector is critical. So is that baseline done? Is it good? And then is it updated? I think in a lot of countries in our group, it needs updating. And so I think that's extremely important to get those results in local content. And it's particularly important in the many countries where local content rules are prescriptive. Because if we're looking at a country like Oman, where local content rules are incentives based, so when you bid on local content, and it's like a competitive local content offer. There, you don't need to be as it's not as critical to have a very accurate view of the supply base. But in a country like Uganda, where it's extremely prescriptive, then it is really critical. And I think, you know, on that, the energy local content map will be useful in order to like benchmark countries. Countries can benchmark themselves against others and see what others are doing. I think this issue of being prescriptive and the accuracy of the industrial baseline survey is important also for countries in the current context, where it is very competitive for investment dollars. And you hear oil and gas companies sort of commenting that prescriptive rules are a disincentive, and local content in itself is even a disincentive. Of course, that is only the case when there's these mismatch between the requirements of local content and the supply availability. So I think, you know, despite despite the pressure that oil companies are sort of pushing on issues like local content, I don't think that it's likely that countries would abandon or slacken local content rules. So again, I think it's really just important to have a realistic assessment of what the economy can offer, and then to increase over time your requirements. I think another point that I wanted to raise is that, you know, as new oil and gas producers, the countries are entering the sector at a time where we have a warming world, and we're talking about transitioning out of the sector. And we have, you know, every country will have a different timeline of how long the oil and gas sector will be active and alive and kicking in their country. But it is important to think about how long they have and what the future growth sectors will be. And so we kind of have a funny mismatch right now where we're talking across the world about just transition, and in the same breath, we're talking about local content for the oil and gas sector. And I think it's important to be explicit and really look at some incoherences between those two, because if we're talking about just transition, we're talking about you know, sort of transitioning the national economy towards a low carbon growth sectors, and you're sort of laden with old industries where you have workers that are tied to it and need to be reskilled and retrained and supported to be able to offer services for these new sectors. And so you're thinking about reskilling and retraining for the future. So I think if we have this strong focus on just transition, to keep our focus on local content policy for the oil and gas sector as it was in the past is really going to do a disservice to countries, whether it's, you know, the Angolas and Nigerias and Indonesias of this world, or if it's, of course, emerging producers that are designing from scratch. It would be quite important in my mind to be thinking about training for the oil and gas supply chain that is not going to lock in the supplier base to a more vulnerable part of the value chain. So I think we need to kind of update our thinking on local content so that we achieve local participation while preparing suppliers for tomorrow's industries. So thinking about lock-in, thinking about more what is more vulnerable and what is likely to, you know, there will always be a demand for. So I think it's interesting that some of the lessons of oil and gas local content from the past are actually very good lessons for thinking of just transition. We always will be needing welders and electricians. And so I think it's important to think, you know, exactly as we did for those older projects, that how we can learn from that. And leapfrogging that whole issue of reskilling for an emerging producer. We don't have to reskill, we just skill right and skill for the future. And so I think I just want to kind of emphasize that kind of forward-thinking view that emerging producers should have, because they're not going to abandon local content requirements, nor should they, because they want to capture as much value as possible from capital-intensive projects. But they just have to be very smart about it in this context. So I'll end there and just look forward to comments from the participants and any discussion around these issues. And I look forward to seeing the map updated with some of our countries added to it. So that'll be a great addition. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll be thrilled to have your members sort of actively take part in that in terms of, you know, helping with content as well. Guyana will definitely be one of the first countries that we target. So again, we have a bit of a small group, so by all means, we use the Q&A to ask any questions. Obviously, Valerie's been working this topic for a long time. You can speak again to her point about implementation. Yes, we all know about local content laws. We can make really good laws, but if they're not implemented right, it doesn't really matter. The same can be said for company policies. So by all means, use the Q&A function.
Jeff, I have a question.
Yes.
To what extent would there be a sort of a systematic inclusion of like industrial baseline surveys? Is that secretive, or could that be added?
No, it absolutely should be. That is exactly the kind of, if it's, I mean, obviously if it's proprietary, or, that the government has to give permission for it to be posted, but 100%. I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing that we keep seeing with local content regulations, is they're made without doing those studies, or even crazier. Sometimes these studies are done perhaps by one administration. That administration is gone, and then they start making new laws without looking at the old baseline. So we've seen that over and over. So certainly, that's definitely the kind of content that we would definitely love to see on the map if it's allowed to be posted. Of course, we would post it, but it's a question of obviously proprietary relationships and clients and that kind of thing. But we 100% agree with that. I think that in many ways we keep seeing this. We're doing right now the Mining Should Value program. We're doing a program in Ghana on local content for mining, but similar idea where these legislations are being made without actually looking at what's available in the market. I mean, this country, Ghana has a very similar to Tanzania approach of listing items that have to be procured locally, and yet the items on that list don't bear much reality to what the productive capacity is of the country. And so sometimes that may be on purpose, and sometimes it may be because they just haven't done the studies. So 100%, we'd love to see those studies on the map.
Yeah, in previous discussions, I mean, of course, please join in any participants while we're chatting. But in a previous workshop that we had on local content in the New Producers Group, we had sort of asked the countries, that had done industrial baseline surveys, how much it cost, and it's not very expensive. It's like $200,000 to $300,000 about, in that ballpark. And the government of Uganda was saying how much value they got out of that, because it paid off in multiples because 100%. Of having successful investment, because it was targeted investment and not just kind of all over the place. I think one of the big issues I've heard in the group is also that often the industrial baseline surveys are initiated or offered by the oil companies because they want to get the government focused on what is the real capacity level. But then governments are a bit hesitant because they don't know if they trust what the oil company is producing, because they think their interests are not aligned, which they are and aren't to some extent. But I think it is in both interests side to get local content because it's cheaper for the company. I think the companies don't want prescriptive rules that aren't achievable, but I think they aren't, against local content. So I would be interested in your thoughts on that. Like, is there an issue with an industrial baseline survey funded by an oil company, and would there be really a significant difference in that survey if it were conducted or paid for by the government?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't see there's not really much reason why it would be a problem for the oil and gas company to pay for it. I mean, I think the one argument you could make is that maybe some oil and gas companies might bias the study towards short-term opportunities and ones that are not going to raise costs in the short term. Because as you will know, quite often local content means raising the cost curve in the short term, and then as that product is being made and getting the competitiveness up and then going down. So that might be the only reason, but I don't agree. I agree that it doesn't seem likely the company would have much interest in doing that. And our experience mirrors that. I think the companies do. There's usually enough low-hanging fruit and short-term opportunities that the company sees that. So I really think there would be. I will make one comment on the what you said about the cost of these baseline studies is that ironically they're too cheap. I think in some ways because the aid world isn't good at giving out $200,000 grants, right? Like this is, to me, where we have a huge opportunity. And we did the exact same thing in Ghana with our project, and doing a big feasibility study for a caustic soda plant. And yes, that was a $50,000 study, I think, something like this. But it's not easy to get $50,000 for a study, a feasibility study from a bilateral aid organization. They don't work in that space, right? So you might be able to get a study as part of a larger program, a larger suite of activities, perhaps by the World Bank or something. But it's really hard to get just money for a industrial baseline, and that would be, as you alluded to, probably more valuable than anything else, right? Like we will see often that bilateral aid organizations will fund big programs in the millions of dollars without having done that study, which is a bit crazy, but that's the reality. So I think, I think that's a huge demand for that out there. Tatiana?
Yes, there's a question. It says like local content data / reporting often lack of consistency at duplication. It's justified through countries / regions / projects, etc. Developing own legislation and KPIs. Argument against this is that regardless of country maturity, everyone wants a local good and services purchase, local recruitment and local supply chain where possible. Therefore, driving consistency of reporting data fundamental to reduce waste and enable global reporting. Thoughts, discuss. I'm gonna copy this and put it on our chat so you can just perhaps relook at this.
Okay, yeah. So maybe take a rewind. Yeah, no, I'm 100%. I mean, we need reporting. This is one of our biggest focuses at Mining Industry Value, is pushing companies in the mining and oil and gas sectors to report consistently on local procurement, and actually go into where that money is going. So it doesn't really the spend amount doesn't matter much if the money is all going to imported goods being resold by a reseller. What really matters is value addition. And I think there is where I hope the energy local content map can really help, because countries like Oman have really got this right, in terms of this. They and Valerie alluded to it with the incentive structure. They actually take a given potential bid or proposal for a contract and say how much money or how much value, in-country value they call it, is going to Oman. So whether this includes Omani employees, Omani management, Omani inputs, and then you can actually get a score essentially saying this particular bid for this tender is 82% Omani and this one's only 71. That's a big contrast from most of the local content approaches of countries, where essentially it really just matters what the spend is. And there's no disaggregation between imported goods and not imported goods, truly owned and managed by local people versus international firms. So we need this measurement. I mean, we cannot possibly measure this properly or manage this properly if we don't measure this. And I will say that whatever one might say about Nigeria's approach, at least in the Nigerian case, the government does report back to the public about their Nigerian content. Now, we can discuss whether those numbers are fully accurate, or if they include some of these problems I alluded to, but at least they're kind of consistently saying this year Nigerian content was this, last year was that, and that gives at least an open for discussion, which is very rare, because you see this in Nigeria, you'll see that in the Gulf countries, but most of the other countries don't even really report back what's going on with these figures once these regulations are in place. So I think it's incredibly important to have that. So I don't know, Valerie, if you have any thoughts on measurement in your own work.
Well, I think Ipieca put out that measurement and reporting guidelines. So maybe Isabel or Chloe will have something more informed than me on that topic.
Chloe, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah. No. I'm happy to share a little bit what we worked on. That's a good point, Valerie. Was about to put it in the chat. Yeah. So this guidance took a little bit of time for members to working on it. It was really interesting to see the work of members coalescing around it, and also to get the consultants' perspective and all this work together. The objective, well, first, the guidance is adapted, or at least was written with both oil and gas and renewables in mind, and it really recognizes that local content can be of course is an important vehicle for stimulating socioeconomic development, but there's a need for consistency across the local content reporting. And so that's why we developed the guidance really provides a roadmap in a structured framework to guide practitioners towards implementation of effective measurement and reporting processes. So I'll put the link there, but yeah, really the roadmap is helpful to, it shows how to select, how to collect, how to select metrics, collect data, and analyze it. So I'll put that now in the chat. Is there another question in the chat at the moment? I was wondering. Yes, I see more. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, on corruption risks in local content, I think there's a lot of there's been a lot of analysis of of corruption risks in local content, especially in academic articles, and I think a big part of the corruption risk that I've noted was around local content that is focused on joint ventures with local companies, and they are often shell companies and are not providing any content or any capital, and they're really just being carried. And if they have beneficial owners that are connected to the rulers, I think that's kind of a typical corruption in local content that's been certainly studied in many of the countries. But maybe Jeff, you'll have some other points.
No, 100%. And we would really love for people to post any articles about these risks and these concerns. I mean, certainly it's always there in every country that we work in both mining and oil and gas. We see corruption as a big hindrance of local content. It's in the regulations. It's also even in the selection of the goods that are on these lists and what's not on the list, for example. Right. So I've got some very problematic stories from many countries now that we worked in, and unfortunately it becomes we hope the map can be helpful for this too, because as a member you can post this content in a way which maybe someone in that country can't. And that's what we often see, is that everyone sort of knows it's there, but it's very difficult for someone in a given country, a civil society organization to say about this corruption. The company itself, I mean, an oil and gas company doesn't necessarily want to make a big public fuss and accuse the government of corruption. That's not in their it's not good for business to accuse the government of corruption, and for that matter, it's problematic for a government to do the same to a company. So it is a big elephant in the room that we consistently see that is not being addressed in any way. And I think, for one thing, the better measurement is definitely a big part of mitigating this and preventing this in the first place. And that kind of thing. But I think, yes, it's a huge issue. So again, it's certainly the kind of content we hope people can post on the map as to studies, news articles. I don't think, for example, that journalists are well placed right now. I don't think journalists quite understand the issue about local content enough to be able to call it out as much as they should be able to, and that would be a really good open space to do that. So.
Yeah, and I note that the energy local content map includes academic studies as well. So there's links under the news items that are more like a very in-depth reviews of corruption risks and things. I looked at Nigeria to check.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to single them out, but just.
Yes, it's a balance. I think the balance is that if you say you cannot buy from a business that has connections to a political elite, well, I mean, every country in the world, businesses are always owned by people connected to government. I mean, that's just the nature. Successful people end up being government. So I think there is a line to find on this, but we need to call it corruption when it exists. We've got about 10 minutes left. There's no harm in giving 10 minutes of people's days back, but certainly I don't know, Chloe or Isabel, if you have any final thoughts or questions.
Well, I was probably what you mentioned, Valerie, which there are two topics that are very active. We are very active at Ipieca, and I think you mentioned this sort of incoherence between just transition and local content. And I'm maybe curious to get a bit more perspective from you, like how are they emerging producers grappling with this? Because I think, and we talked a little bit about Ipieca Week as well, in terms of some of that, I would say, equity dimension, especially for those emerging producers, that generally they obviously want to develop their resources and they want their population to sort of benefit from that economic growth. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting perspective, and would great if you could elaborate more in terms of how they are looking at that leapfrogging from a skills perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I think the equity dimension is very prominent in the new producers discussions. Like, we talk a lot about, it's unfair that the world has pulled away from supporting them in their first steps with the sector. So there's very little technical assistance, there's very little support for projects. There's really a feeling of that this is, you know, not an equitable situation when the first global north continues to extract what it can from its own oil and gas fields. But I think we may start conversations like that, but then quickly switch to, okay, but let's be smart in this situation, and what's the smart way forward for us in our own interests. And I think you know, we've slated a local content as a next discussion we'd like to have, and then we would really be seeing how to align a just transition perspective with a local content strategy. And I think everything that we do in the New Producers Group is really thinking about how to think about things in an emerging producer context, which will be very different, because just transition doesn't make sense in an emerging producer context. None of these countries are locked into the sector. None of them are particularly dependent on it. So it's not about reskilling, it's about skilling right. And so how can we bring together that skilling right focus into the local content thinking? I think it requires going beyond just copying others' local content approaches, you know, using the templates and just kind of doing what was done in the past, and guiding. Often, you know, local content policies are drafted by consultants. So guiding consultants with a new approach. Design this differently for me. Design this to achieve these goals, I think would already be a good start. I haven't seen that really yet in any of the countries, that focus, but I think that's why it would be valuable for us to kind of put this on people's radars, as that it should be really a focus to avoid having to reskill anybody in the future. So let's talk about that.
Thank you very much, Valerie. I recall you mentioned, I think in one of our conversations, this analogy of like, this is a bit of like a white canvas for emerging producers, because it really is, as you say, not really copying and pasting, but really like a new opportunity, I think, from that in that regard, in terms of the energy transition.
Yeah, I think it's really it has to be the opportunity, rather than thinking of it as you know, a disadvantage. It's an advantage, because there's an opportunity to do it better. And we often, over the last 12 years of the group, have been saying, let's avoid this. It's like leapfrogging errors that come from being locked into old ways. I think it would be a really valuable topic for us to focus on.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. I'm happy certainly to wrap up. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, Isabel or Chloe.
There is one question.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It says, what are the main differences in local content for renewables activities versus local content in oil and gas?
That's a very complicated question, which I might, Valerie, do you have some thoughts on that?
I'm not briefed enough on local.
Yeah.
renewables. So I'll send that hot potato to you.
As I said, Isabel and Chloe. I mean, I think obviously the different skill sets and different OEMs involved. So I think that's one of the things we're trying to figure out. I don't think there isn't right now very much analysis of this. There are some high profile cases of local content, in solar, the Indian case of solar panels and various other ones. But I think we're pretty early on in terms of being able to say, what is the exact what traits make good solar production and not. I think the proprietary nature of the solar technology, I think in particular, makes it probably less accessible in some ways to some of the value opportunities in oil and gas. I mean, I think you always have fabrication and large scale, works like that, which add value to things like, wind power and the welding and all that kind of stuff. But certainly there's a lot of bits to renewables which are much more proprietary, which does propose a bigger barrier, I think, in some ways, to some of the oil and gas space. So I think that's one initial difference I would, lay out for that. I think again, there's a huge need for analysis, and particularly for country-focused analysis on this. Right, we see a lot of people, rushing into things like solar and renewables and wind, and let's be honest, just like mining and just like oil and gas, not every country is well suited to do these things, and not every country is well suited to provide the inputs for those sectors either, depending on things like high cost of power and various access to capital, various other factors. So I think I'll sort of say it depends, and it's there are some initial differences, but we're still working this out. Okay, well, in that case, I'd like to thank everybody for joining. Ipieca is an international global organization which focuses on the Eastern, Australia and other countries. So they get a lot of demand to do the webinars for the East. So we're really happy when people, who demand these attend. So we realized it was a smaller group, but thank you very much for attending today. We really wanted to make sure this was accessible to the whole world, given the whole local content map covers the whole world. So we'll really appreciate that. As the newsletter is in the chat, subscribing. This recording will eventually be available, but for now, it would be really great if people could sign up for the newsletter, and they will be sort of kept abreast of all the developments in local content, and for that matter, on anything related to the map itself, like webinars. So that's all from me. I don't know, Isabel and Chloe, if you want to add any final thoughts from Ipieca.
Well, no, maybe just to say that although we had, I think, limited numbers for participants, we will disseminate this also with our members, and I'm sure there will be a great interest because, as you mentioned, Jeff, obviously it's a key topic, and also in that part of the world. So we look forward to the collaboration with you on the local content map. Really excited about this new opportunity, and also to thank Valerie very much for her participation. Very, very grateful, and thank you to our participants as well.
Great. Thanks so much. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks all.
Bye, everybody.